This man just wanted to vibe and play accordion, and he accidentally shaped foreign policy for the next 200 or so years.
Welcome to Unbelievable, the podcast where I tell my good friend Kurt two unbelievable stories from history, but here's the catch. One of them's real, one of them's fake.
And I have to decide which one's which.
That's right. I am based on real events, Luis Mejia, joined here by inspired by historical facts, Kurt Danner. And we are back. Kurt told us a couple stories last week, and now it is my turn. I have two stories for you, Kurt. I'm going to be taking the reins this episode, but before we get started, Kurt, please, I think you may or may not have a fun fact for me.
I may, in fact, have a fun fact for you. And in fact, that fun fact is true or false. During the Black Plague, noblemen were briefly given transfusions of milk because it was believed that it would revitalize them and strengthen their constitution.
Who doesn't like a good old little milk transfusion?
A little calcium.
You know, we've talked a lot about the humors in this show, Kurt, and, you know, as a big believer of balancing one's humors, milk never fits in there. Does not fill with Galen's usual theories. I'm going to say no, Kurt. I'm going to go on a limb and say, no, milk was not used.
You are correct, Luis. You know, I think I was just thinking about our episode the other day where we talked about strange cures to plagues, and I was like, it's funny no one ever tried milk. That sounds pretty believable. But I had forgotten who I was talking to. Distinguished gentleman Luis, humor's scholar.
Only reason I grew out my mustache is so that I could finally recreate got milk ads. Frankly, every single time I drink milk, whole milk mostly, it gets stuck in my mustache, and I feel like Michael Jordan in 1993.
That's nice. Anyway,
it's incredible.
This fast fact is neither here nor there, because mostly what I'm excited for is to hear what stories you've brought, because I have been waiting. It's been a while since I've gotten to hear you tell me a couple stories. So no more. Please continue. Go on, Luis. I will wait silently and listen.
Well, Kurt, I am happy you are ready for some stories, because today I have prepared a couple of interesting tales, mostly. I think, as I really do enjoy bringing in political intrigue to all of this, and mostly highlighting the works of specific big random men throughout history. So I think I've got a nice mix of both. And we're actually going to touch on regions of the world that we also have not previously touched before. So we're moving away a little bit from my joy of only talk about Mexico.
Ooh, new regions unlocked.
New regions unlocked, Kurt.
Unbelievable podcast DLC content, new continents.
Exactly. New season. New season.
New season.
We're actually going to begin our tales. The first one of the two, we are going to start off in Prague, Kurt. You familiar with Prague?
I know of Prague. I have never been to Prague, but I know it is the capital of Czechoslovakia, but depending on the time, it may be a different name.
Well, right now, Czechoslovakia does not exist, Kurt. It's currently Czechia, also known as the Czech Republic. But
there's Czechia too? I didn't know about this one. But either way, right out of the gate, stop the podcast. Pull everything. Get me out of here.
Pull everything. But at this point,
take out some consonants in editing. So I said Czechia.
Yeah, right. But so at this point, I'm gonna go back to 1795.
Good year.
Because at this point, it's not Czechia, it's not the Czech Republic, it's not even Czechoslovakia yet.
Whoa.
This is a period of history when Prague is within a kingdom known as Bohemia.
Ooh.
That's what currently that region of Czechia is known as Bohemia, the western part of what is now the Czech Republic.
Okay.
But if we go back to Prague in 1795, we find this man named Jan Alexei Brodislav Roditz.
Ooh, nice. That's many names, especially for my American brain, and all of them are good. Every one of them was a good one.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know why I said thank you. It's this man's name. But
well, because you made it up, of course.
Of course. Now, this man, we're just going to call him Jan Roditz for ease sake, because I'm not going to say Jan Alexei Brodislav Roditz.
I might even go to Yanni. I'm feeling pretty comfortable with him. I like him so far. I guess I better hold my tongue. He could be the villain. He's a eugenicist.
Oh God, he always is a eugenicist, isn't he? Or a Nazi scientist. No, don't worry. We're not touching that period of history right now, because it's 1795. This man is born in Prague. He is born to a semi-working class family, but it's a very, very prestigious working class. What do I mean by this? His family are owners of clubs and cabarets and different bars around Prague. So this is a family of nightclub owners, essentially.
Nice.
Around Prague, there's around 3 very famous cabarets, and the Jan Roditz family owns all of these. So
are they owning them in like a greasy way? Like, is it a like shady nightclub vibe, or are they like a entertainment empire, social gatherings mogul?
At this point, nightclubs are picture French cabarets, like the Moulin Rouge, right? Things like that. So it's a place
here.
where
we're high art.
Yes, maybe, Kurt, but I think
art.
it's just high art to compare to what we think of now as high art. Like back in the day, this is a place where people go to drink. This is a place where people go to gamble. Some of these places kind of operate as brothels as well. It's just a place where the rich, the poor, all gather in one same environment to see semi-naked ladies dance and drink and gamble and talk amongst themselves, right? It's where everyone goes to cool off, blow off some steam, and maybe a couple other substances.
Nice.
Now, the rich, the poor, aristocracy, politicians, monarchy, this is a bit of a melting pot of all of those places, because who doesn't love a good drink? This is a bit of a turbulent time for Bohemia at the time, which again now is the Czech Republic. It's because at this point, after being an independent kingdom for so long, it was one of the big medieval kingdoms of Europe at the time, even at some point known as the heart of Europe. Bohemia has been absorbed by the Habsburg Empire at the early 1800s. And because this is the early 1800s, say 1800, 1810, kind of those decades, what has just happened? Well, the French Revolution has just happened. So there's beginning to be this post-Enlightenment feeling of we need to democratize, we need to move away from the old status quo and things of the sort.
No
right?
gods, no kings, no rulers time.
Exactly. So all the way in France, people are decapitating their kings, there's civil unrest. Because of this, there's a bit of a nationalistic boom in Bohemia. There's a lot of independence movements. There's also people trying to move away from nobility. There's all these different movements, these also new early social movements. You could call them potentially the beginnings, the rising of social democrats, or even early socialism, early communism, though it doesn't have that name yet. But it's these feelings of we need to move away from the status quo. So
we're into new governments. We're ready to branch out.
Exactly.
We're getting experimental on the government front.
Exactly. And because of this, also Bohemia, for most of its history, like I told you, was known as the heart of the Habsburg Empire, the heart of Europe, because it had a lot of resources, lots of trees. So it was ransacked for said resources for most of the time. So the Bohemians really want their own independence. They want to say, hey, back off, everyone. Close borders. We want no one in, essentially. Again, social, political unrest going on.
What are you going to do about that? That's always going on, you know? What are you going to do?
You can never escape it, Kurt. It's like then, like it is now. It's always going to be around. Might as well just join.
Have you ever heard someone say the word social rest? No, that's how you know. They're always unresting.
And this was a period of social rest.
Yeah, no, you never hear that on the news.
Never hear that, no. Of course not. That doesn't sell.
We're all rich. Economy's great. Social rest.
No one's upset at all. Wow. Now, Yanni, little Jan, he was, again, constantly paraded around the rich in this cabaret. His family owned the cabaret, so he grew up around the rich, the poor, and all these different people. His family always wanted him to marry rich.
Classic. What are you going to do about that? That's always going on.
Because listen, at the end of the day, even though you're a successful business owner, you're still the successful business owner of a bit of a seedy business.
Right.
Like you're still known as the people that have potential prostitutes rolling around with them.
Right. They're in a good place, but there's still room above them for sure.
Yeah. So his family wants him to marry rich. Again, since this is still a semi-post nobility word, like it's still moving past kings and nobility, but it's still very much part of society. So they want him to move above it. Jan doesn't really care for the rich. He's like, yeah, I get it. Like, I understand why I must do this. However, he is very much friends with artists and painters and musicians and even Romani people of the place. And he enjoys that quote unquote low life. You know, he enjoys spending time with these creatives at the time. But he understands. Like he says, yeah, sure. I need to take care of my family. I need to secure a legacy and honor for my future children. I understand, right? So along passes a little bit of time. During one of his club outings, he meets this woman called Eloisa Bauer, who at the time was a member of the Bohemian Austrian nobility, some sort of high class family of the time. This Eloisa gal.
She's just part of the entourage.
Yeah, she's a rich noble woman.
She's in the group photo.
She is, and yes. like you're not going to hear from her in history books. She didn't really do anything notable unless just being rich, basically.
Right. When she was alive, people knew her name, but now it's not someone that we would ever hear of.
Exactly. So Jan and Eloisa get married, so it does work out. And he's like, okay, wonderful. They manage to not only raise Jan's nobility status to an actual nobleman, but also his club, because it's now also co-owned by Eloisa and her family, grows in popularity with the high class of Prague.
Nice.
So now the people from Prague, the higher class of Prague are now flocking to this club. They're saying, oh, this is now a nice place. This is now the place where we go to, and we don't get to mingle with those hardworking people from the slums, quote unquote, of course.
Yeah, they said the words hardworking, I bet.
In perfect English, too.
Yeah.
Now, the main cabaret that the Ruditz family owns, essentially the one that Jan directly manages, becomes a posh club.
Nice.
I'm not going to try to pronounce the Bohemian name of it, or the Czech name, but it's essentially like the Broken Raccoon.
Nice.
It's the name of it.
Whoa. Okay, Luis, would you party at the Broken Raccoon? I mean, let's say you don't know that it's like the high society place. Just like, on paper, the place is called the Broken Raccoon. You partying?
Shoot, that was my nickname in college, Kurt. Of course I'm going to go there.
I'm in. It sounds like a scarier Chuck E. Cheese, and I feel like that would be so fun.
Yeah, basically. But it's frequented by exclusively very rich people.
Nice.
Now, Jan is initially upset at this change of business, change of managing, because he's friends with the artists, with the lower, quote unquote, lower class people. He loves those guys.
He's like, I
those
love the hardworking people.
Yeah, exactly.
My more hardworking friends.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Now he understands that he needs to somewhat make sacrifices for his living and his progeny and his family to be well off in some future. That doesn't stop him from hanging out with these friends. He was also a pretty good accordion player, so oftentimes he would leave at night to go hang out with his other friends at the poorer neighborhoods of Prague and join for dances and play music and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. So he would meet with all the different intellectuals and creatives of the time and just play. Again, this was disapproved by both his family, his wife's family, because why are you mingling with these not only poorer people, but some of them were Romani. So there's some racism at hand. Right. We're always back to that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's Europe in the 1800s.
Right. So hold for a second, because now I have something to add to it. Okay. Now, if you have the choice, either you party at the Broken Raccoon or you go play your accordion for the artists and intellectuals of the quote-unquote hardworking society. Now what are you doing, Luis? I know that's a tough one for you.
It's very difficult for me, really. Knowing me, I would try to break boundaries. You know me, I'm a boundary breaker, always looking to spend time with both societies.
You would definitely find a way to do both, that's for sure.
This goes on for a while. Like, his family knows that this is going on. Whatever, he keeps going. By the way, this is like 1820s-ish, so this man is still semi-young. He's like 25 at this point.
Hey, just hanging out.
Yeah, he's still a young guy, so of course he's wanting to go out and party with his friends and not manage a whole...
Sowing some wild oats, catching the accordion vibes, you know?
Exactly, Kurt. The dream that any 25-year-old could want.
He's like, please, Mr. Broken Raccoon is my father. Call me Yanni, okay?
Call me Yanni.
I'm just out here living it up. I'm not in charge of the thing.
I'm just here to have a good time. Eloise is really the person running this.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it would be, yeah.
One night when he goes out with his friends and comes back, he finds the broken raccoon in the middle of burning down.
Oh no!
And by in the middle of burning down, I mean it's burned down, and it's just essentially just embers at this point.
Oh, we're at the
just
crispy stage.
slightly
Oh,
burning.
that's not good.
We're at the this is lost.
Yeah.
It's a lost cause. Now he's panicked. Of course, you know, your livelihood has essentially gone up in flames, literally. He runs to his wife and to his family. His wife seems surprisingly calm about this whole ordeal.
Oh.
Long story short, Yanni finds out that Eloisa and her family, who had control of this cabaret, ostensibly,
Right.
they found it to be more beneficial for this place to burn down mysteriously and collect the insurance money for it than to keep it going. So this was just a ploy to get money and then spend that money on other ventures and get more money, essentially.
Little insurance fraud action. Wow.
Little insurance fraud action, even back in the mid 1820s. This has been going on for a while.
I know. They did it before it was cool, you know?
Yanni, as we have seen, Jan has been a revolutionary most of his life and really doesn't really like rich people. He was just hanging on there for the goodness of the rest of his family.
Right.
He sees this as the final straw. He says, okay, all right, you guys are just corrupt with money, corrupt with power. You just want more power. I've had it. I'm done. I'm not going to do this. I grew up hearing about the French Revolution, the late Enlightenment ideas that have been brewing within me have reached boiling point, and I am now feeling more at home with the typical outcast of society than with this high nobility that is willing to throw down my entire business, my entire family's heritage just for more money.
Right. He said, I'm taking my accordion and I'm leaving.
And so he did, Kurt, because he decided power corrupts, cannot stay in Prague. This is BS. I gotta go. I'm not staying in this place, this God's forsaken place. He escapes eastward. Westward. He starts going westward with his musician and artist friends. So he gathers 10 to 12 of his friends and all of them and decides to make a bit of a traveling troupe. And he's gonna he's making a road trip all the way to the west of Europe, to Western Europe, with his eventual goal is to reach Paris. So he starts moving away, and he believes that moving farther away from the place where corruption lies is going to free his mind a little bit more. He starts experimenting with non-traditional ways of dealing with everything. So sex, drugs, rock and roll, basically. he is
sex, drugs, accordion.
Sex, drugs, accordionist. Yes. So him and his merry group of friends, they decide to dedicate themselves to frugality, to stay away from this evil that money and power brings. They adhere to these non-traditional definitions of love, of sex, of alcohol use, of drug use. So they are traveling from town to town. So they begin at Prague. They go west, and they're going westward for not only adventure, but they're traveling musicians. They're trying to seek they're going on a world tour, basically.
Right.
Now, they're going from Prague westward to Nuremberg. They go through Luxembourg. They go up to Brussels and then down to France. All the burgs. And then they start moving down to France. Now, this whole time, they're sleeping in tents. They're staying at people's houses or guest houses, even sometimes in barns or such. Whatever meager pay they can earn, they do so by hosting different events, by being hired out as musicians, by saying, "Hey, we're a traveling act. We'd love to be here." They're essentially just depending on people's charity and trying to win people over to their cause of live freely, enjoy this different type of living. Now, they would stop at each town spreading this ideology, hosting little cultural events, teaching people the history of Bohemia and things of the sort. They would invite people in each town and each little place they visited, invite them to join their caravan. Everywhere they went, they would say, "Hey, if you want to come with us, there's no limit. Please come along. We would love to travel with you all the way to Paris."
Oh, they're growing the movement.
Exactly. Many did, actually. And they would even get some wealthy patrons to send them money or meet people with carriages. that would help them with their journey.
Wow.
Things of
They
the
got
sort.
a whole like Bohemian Oregon Trail thing going on.
Yeah, exactly. and the press of the time even started following them around. Imagine Forrest Gump doing his run across the world, and
Right.
how by the end everyone's just following him around. Why? Because I don't know. This is interesting.
Right.
So their goal was to, like I said, reach Paris. It's this new city, this revitalized city that is now with a republic, and the French Revolution, new ideas. It's the best. Oui, Paris, things like that. They felt that they would be most accepted in this place. And after about nearly 2 years of traveling, mind you, like they were essentially doing this whole trip on foot and whatever carts they could find. They even raised their group from around 10 to 15 people to nearly 80.
Wow. And that's including the reporters with them or not?
No, this is actually just their troop. Like, reporters would come and go.
Okay.
Reporters would probably not really leave
So it's
much of their
it's
town.
like 80 of them, and then 19th century Vice is like checking in every so often.
Yeah, essentially. I guess we're in France, so I guess it would be pronounced Vice. I don't know. Now, they settle down in Paris. Most specifically, they arrive in the Latin Quarter of Paris, also the Montmartre area of Paris, which are just on opposite sides of the Seine. And they start settling in these two different places. They open bistros, they open different cafes. Obviously, they start opening some cabarets in these neighborhoods, once again spreading these ideologies of free love, of music, of sharing ideas, of being creative, and things of the sort. Now, this was very popular in 1820s Paris. Like, it exploded in popularity. This was the beginning of an entirely new movement in Europe, never seen before. Remember where Jan and his friends were from. They were from Bohemia.
Right. From Prague.
From Prague, which again is now Czechia, back in the day was Bohemia. So the group that Jan belonged to named themselves the Traveling Bohemians. And everywhere they went to, they spread this lifestyle that was known as the Bohemian lifestyle.
Right.
And so what we like this lifestyle, this ideology, this way of thinking, this emphasis on frugality and living freely is what we essentially would now call hippie culture. So anti-establishment, free love, living for the purpose of living, frugality. Again, this was all pushed by Jan Broditz and his traveling Bohemians.
Right.
And so this started the whole Bohemian movement, not just in Paris, where it was the most prominent, but in all the different cities that he visited. Essentially, single-handedly, he started the Bohemian movement.
Wow.
Now, Jan grew old in Paris. He stayed there for years, never remarried, but is rumored to have had dozens of companions, which
Nice.
I love just the vagueness of that. It's just dozens. He never returned to his native Bohemia. Some of his partners did and whatever, but he himself died in Paris in 1856.
He found his place.
Yeah, he did find his place. He did die of crippling gout. Like, he had
No, wait, you know what? Actually,
gout.
that's good. That means he really found his place.
Exactly. You know, he really found his place, stayed in Paris, mostly because he couldn't move due to gout. Now, this seems like I'm coming to a bit of an abrupt end, and this just seems like, oh, this man just walked around Europe and spread his ideology. But think of the consequences of this Bohemian lifestyle, of this thing he pushed. Now, let me give you some examples of some things that this man essentially caused.
Right.
One of the people that he met when he was in Paris and that was around his circle of friends was a man named Henri Murger, also known as Henry Murger, who was born
Sounds so
in
much better in French.
Henri, so this man, Henry, was born in 1822. So he was around 10, 15 years old when the traveling Bohemians arrived in Paris and settled all this.
When the traveling Bohemians came.
Exactly. Where were you when the traveling Bohemians arrived? Now, this man grew up in his 30s in 1856, the same year that Jan died, and the Bohemian lifestyle was huge. He published this book called Scenes de la Vie Bohème, which is just what he lived, what he experienced as a young man in these two neighborhoods of the Latin Quarter and the Montmartre neighborhood of his Bohemian lifestyle, which eventually in 1896 would become the opera by Puccini, La Bohème, which is one of the most popular operas of all time, which eventually led to the musical Rent, which is based on La Boheme.
Wow.
Which is, again, all about the bohemian lifestyle in Paris at this time. Something else. One of the disciples or the people that was growing up in this movement that lived in this Latin Quarter and this area was a Catalan man that was traveling with the Bohemians, met the Bohemians, and really loved this idea and started to open cabarets of his own. In 1889, he opened the Moulin Rouge, like we mentioned earlier. Like the Moulin Rouge was opened by a follower of Jan Roditz.
Wow. This man's impact.
Not only that, this keeps getting crazier. How this man just keeps going. Now, one of the places he visited on his way westward from Prague, he went to Nuremberg and some towns on the border of what is now Germany with Belgium and things like that.
Right.
He visited a town called Trier.
Okay.
Trier in what is now Germany. Yes, hardly know her. And guess who was living in Trier around the time when the traveling Bohemians arrived? I'm glad you asked, Kurt. It was a young Karl Marx.
I would have guessed Freddie Mercury, and then he was like, "Oh, this movement's kind of cool." Bohemian Rhapsody time.
No, but this was a young Karl Marx.
Yeah, sorry. Let me not brush over that. That is wild.
No, yeah, Kurt. I'm great joke. Great, keep it. We're keeping it in. However, the young Karl Marx and mostly his father was influenced by this bohemian lifestyle, which would then influence Karl Marx to give a different focus away from nobility into the hands of the people and rethink this social way of living, right?
Yeah.
Like there's even a word that describes the bohemian lifestyle called precariat, which is a combination, a portmanteau of precarious and proletariat. Which is like the proletariat should be living in like precarious situations and things like that. So Jan Roditz and the Traveling Bohemians was probably one of the biggest influences of Karl Marx's youth because he was at university at this time.
Right.
When they went through. So just imagine that. And lastly, one of the final ramifications, if communism was not enough for you, Kurt.
Right.
So Jan died of gout. Okay. Not only did he have gout, he loved beer.
Okay.
And he
I'm waiting to see the connection.
A lot of the people that he met, knew this, and he met a lot of different brewers. One of these brewers was a German man, last name Stolz, Joseph Stolz, who met him in Paris as he was traveling. And Joseph Stolz was sent to the town of Pilsner, was recruited by the town of Pilsner in Bohemia to make beer, to brew beer.
Right.
In around 1845, things like that. So at this point, Jan Roditz has gout and it's bad for him. Like he would die of it several years
We're in
later.
The gout era already.
But this man knows this and says, I'm going to make Jan a cure for gout. So the town of Pilsner is known for their like soft water, they call it, like weird medicinal values in water. And there's some herbs and leaves and spices around the area, like different types of barley and hops that don't grow anywhere
they got
else.
The seasoned water.
Exactly.
The Saison water?
The Saison water. And Joseph Stolz starts working on this cure for gout. I mean, he's a brewer, so he knows how to do beer. So he combines all the elements of the different town of Pilsen to make a specific beer, which, because it was made in the town of Pilsen, it was named Pilsner beer. So the type of beer, Pilsner, which is pale ale, just traditional pale ale, was made in Pilsen in Bohemia by a follower or by a friend of Jan Roditz and the Traveling Bohemians to cure for gout.
Wow.
Now, because...
If only it had worked. Could you imagine that?
Could you imagine? It clearly didn't. But it may have not cured his gout. But because of it, we have beers now like Heineken, Indio. In Mexico, we have a beer called Bohemia. I think Budweiser, too, is a pale ale. It's a pale lager. All of this because of this one man who decided to escape his life as nobility because the Broken Raccoon was burned down by insurance fraud seekers. Basically, all of this, Kurt, because of one man's decision to abandon nobility, gave us an entire bohemian movement and potentially led to the rise of communism.
Wow. It's just, I love that when someone does something in history that has ripple effects, that it always ends up being like a combination of things that you would never think to put together. But that's a super cool idea to me, because I love when someone makes this journey in life that brings culture from one place to another. And there's always these really cool repercussions from it, of like when someone spreads their culture, all the people they touch along the way, and kind of the ripple effects of that, and it ends up way down the line in places you would have never expected it. But it also seems like because this was a moment when people were really open to new ideas and looking for new ideas or sharing ideas with each other, that it was like a really good moment for someone to come in and share their culture with everyone. So it's a really cool story because, you know, I feel like, at least from what I'm hearing, he seems like a humble person. He doesn't seem like he was interested in like, I want to have this big influence. He kind of just wanted to do his thing, and people liked watching it. So it's cool to see, you know, someone who's not looking for like the attention or the fame from it, but they get it because they seem to be deserving of it. And it's also cool because it's like, it's a really cool large scale example of how culture is spread around. And sometimes it's just the origin is just like one person who just simply wants a different life for themselves, or one person who has, I guess, you know, kind of the courage to like make this big life change that ends up spreading cultures.
Yeah. And I mean, things come and go. Like, for example, Bohemia is not a thing anymore. It's just like a region of Czechia. So it may not exist, but you know what the Bohemian lifestyle, the boho lifestyle is, right? And it's because of this man and his traveling Bohemians. And the most important, the most famous opera of all time is named, essentially, it's this man is essentially responsible for it, right? And like, some of these may be a little bit iffy. Like, I talked about the Pilsner beer situation. That's like a potential. Like, some sources say that it was because he wanted to cure gout, but just imagine, Kurt, that's awesome. Yeah. Like, just that there's this connection. Like, what is known is that brewer and Jan were friends, and they did know each other, and he did, and Josef Stolz did go to Bohemia to try to make a new beer. So maybe because beer gets me more excited than communism, I put that for the very end. But even then, right? Like, something as important as the Karl Marx and his theories to be developed from, again, this radical man who decided to live life the way that he believed it should be lived, right? Yeah.
Well, I'll say I'm truly not a very big beer person, but even with my limited knowledge, I still like recognize the, you know, several of the things that you were talking about, like the impact, and like it's amazing that you can pick not one but several things that have completely outlived the origin of our boy Yanni. Because, you know, I would think like you were talking about, a lot of pressure from his family with the broken raccoon and to marry up. And, you know, at the time that he left, it must have seemed to everyone around him, and probably to him as well, that he was kind of throwing his legacy away. But it's amazing he has like multiple legacies, infinitely more well known and famous than his origins. Yeah, this is a massive little domino, big domino story, because you can even put like the Cold War up there as one of the big dominoes, right? And then all the consequences of that, and then you're into like a whole mess.
Exactly.
So yeah, Yanni, our boy Yanni, really had a hand in the modern world that he did not
expect.
This man just wanted to vibe and play accordion, and he accidentally shaped foreign policy for the next 200 or so years.
And once again, I have put myself in the protagonist of these stories. I love this.
Let me tell you something. When I heard the word accordion, I knew you were already long gone, Luis. I already saw you in the rearview mirror, way out of sight, fallen so deep into the identity of this man.
No, so yeah, there's some really, really exciting stuff there with the rise of communism. And, you know, thank you for, I guess we really do have to thank horny people and rich people for Heineken. So, beer and communism. Thanks, Eloisa.
If history is not written and made by rich people and horny people, then who is it made by? It's rich and horny people all the way down.
And if we're lucky, Kurt, or if we're unlucky, it's going to be written by people like us. So, Kurt, I've got another story for you.
Yes.
If you thought this first one was exciting, I have another one that's full of political intrigue, and I know that I always promise to keep Mexico out of this. But Mexico is involved with this story now also.
Mexico's involved. Okay.
Not it doesn't have main character energy as in some other stories. So just keep that in mind.
He tells me every time it's going to be different. No Mexico, no Rome this time. And why do I believe him every time? And now it's just a technicality. No, we're not in Mexico, but Mexico's involved. There's an entanglement with Mexico. I don't know how much more I can put up with this.
Well, Kurt, you put up for the next story, so get ready.
That's true. I'm a captive audience either way, so let's get into it.
All right. So this story, we're going to do a couple of time skips right now because in 1528,
good year.
Very good year. At this point, allegedly, this atoll, this tiny little island, you could say, in the Pacific was discovered by one of Hernan Cortez's men. No one really cares about it. It's uninhabitable. This island, not very important. So we're going to skip ahead in time.
Okay.
1711.
Good year.
Another good year. 1711, around Holy Week, this island is, you could say, rediscovered by the French.
Okay.
The French arrive to it, and because they arrive in Holy Week, they give it the name Île de la Passion, which means Passion Island, or Island of the Passion.
Very French.
Very French. We love Île de la Passion. Now, they drew up the map of the island, they charted the island and everything, and they claimed the island for France as
Finders
Passion
keepers,
Island.
baby.
Exactly. It's a story that we've heard our whole lives. Now, again, France now essentially laid claim to this island, but it wasn't until around 1858, so about 100 years later, that France officially said, this baby is ours. No one touch it. This is mine, essentially.
The paperwork was pending.
Yeah.
Government moved slow, okay? It was processing. Permits, many things to take care of.
It was caught in the bureaucracy that we all hate, Kurt.
Yeah.
We're not going to call this atoll Passion Island or Île de la Passion. We're going to give it its other most famous name. It's called Clipperton Island. Why is it called Clipperton Island? There was, in the 1700s, a pirate and privateer named John Clipperton, fought the Spanish. He was an Englishman. He fought the Spanish in the Pacific and passed by the island.
Okay.
He allegedly used it as a base of operations, or he stayed there to prepare for raids, things like that. So the island is now named. It's named Clipperton Island.
Wow, he just snuck in there and got his little mark on the island, did he?
And this is now what the island is known as.
The French parents are away. Maybe I'll just throw a little party. Get some recognition here. Now it's forever Clipperton Island.
Exactly. French parents are away and the English are here to play. Now, Clipperton Island is the name of this island. It's what it's actually most recognized as. In 1858, as I told you, France claimed it officially for themselves. But this came as a response to the actions of the United States, because 2 years prior, in 1856, the United States found this island, again, quote unquote, discovered this island, and said, holy cow, this is great news for us. Not only is there another island, but we've just passed this law called the Guano Islands Act, meaning that if we find any island in the Pacific that has guano, aka poop, bird poop, if there's an island with guano, it belongs to us, baby. Classic American way, the American way to do this.
I was thinking, I feel like I misspoke before when I said finders keepers, because actually, I feel like in history, it turns out to be more finders who also have a piece of paper saying keepers get keepers, So they were like, you know what? We are finders keepers, and our keeper's piece of paper is in closer proximity to the thing we're keeping, so it's ours now.
My favorite part about this, too, is that the U.S. claimed it. Why? Because they made a law that said if they found it, it's theirs. like, oh, no. Oh, this is yours? Where's your law that says it's yours?
They were like, we're authorized to do this. Don't worry. Under whose authority? Well, our own, of course.
Right. So again, formally, the French took it in 1858, and the U.S. said, fine, as long as you let us do business here.
Very U.S. response.
Very U.S. response.
Has there ever been a foreign issue the U.S. can't answer with fine as long as you let us do business here?
That's how Hawaii became a state. So, I mean, let's be honest. Now, so at this point, mid-1800s, so 1850s, 1860s, the island belongs to France, but it's essentially
among
leased
others.
Out. Yeah, well, it's being leased out to the U.S.
The island belongs to France, etc.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. considering that you've heard now that it's been claimed by the Spanish, it's been claimed by the French, and it's been claimed by the U.S., where do you think this island is? It's in the Pacific, but where do you think it is?
It's probably somewhere. Well, just the fact that everyone's claiming it, no one's realizing there's a conflict, makes me think that it probably has no real importance. So I'm going to guess it's like super far south.
Well, it's actually off the coast of Mexico.
Oh! Oh!
So it's around 1,000 kilometers away from the coast of Mexico.
Wait, I guess I chose the wrong path. It was either we are fighting over this island and it's funny because it's useless to everyone, or it's funny because it is clearly belonging to one person and everyone else is fighting over ownership. It was one of two choices. I just picked the wrong one.
Right. So it's an island fairly close to Mexico. Like it's around 1,300 kilometers away. So a little over 1,000 kilometers from the Mexican coastline, from Acapulco. So if you see it on a map, it's essentially Mexico's. Like it's close to another island that does belong to Mexico. So because of this, Mexico had some activities in the island, in the atoll, in Clipperton Island since like 1840s.
Of course.
So
yeah, I know you're saying distances also, and like I can't picture that, and probably people would get down to like the details of how far exactly should it be before you give it. If you look at the map and you see a little nubbin and you're surprised to see it's not part of Mexico because it's so close, that should be Mexico, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Now, because of this, Mexico had also laid claim to the island in the mid-1840s.
Of course.
So,
I mean, everybody. All skate on this island, okay? Anyone can own this island.
Right.
Put your name in the hat.
So let me just give you just a quick little timeline. 1500s, the Spanish arrive, give it a name. 1700s, the French arrive, give it another name, chart the island. 1840s, Mexico claims it. 1850s, the U.S. claims it. Later in the 1850s, France reclaims it. So there's just this whole ownership question in this island that's not being fixed at all. Now, I think for the most part, there was not a lot of movement in this island for several years. Mostly, why? Well, Mexico got invaded by the French, which complicated things even further. Mexico had a civil war, which complicated things even further. The U.S. had a civil war, which complicated things even further. So really, no one bothered to go to this island, to this atoll in the Pacific, because who cares about it? Now, everyone still claimed that the island was theirs, mind you. Keep that in mind.
Of course. In
1897, so years have passed, several years have passed. French naval authorities were circling the atoll and noticed that there were American workers working on the island to extract the guano.
So all this time, they haven't been aware that multiple people are claiming ownership.
No one really knows. Again, because it's been such a turbulent 30 years in European history and Mexican and U.S. history. It's been such a terrible...
This is like the bottom of the to-do list is like this one island.
And it's an uninhabitable island. The only thing living in this island are crabs, sharks, and also boobies, like the birds.
Yes, the birds. The birds got to be in there.
Like this island is known as Booby Island, which is great. So in 1897, the French arrive and they notice that there's an American flag on the island. They say, what's going on here? Turns out there's Americans there working for the American Guano Company who had raised the U.S. flag. And the U.S. authority said, oh, no, France, we're so sorry about that. We didn't mean to stake claim to the island by raising a flag. That was their fault, dude. Sorry for putting up a flag. The island belongs to you. And France said, yeah, whatever. Essentially kicked the people out where they were still working. Now, Mexico saw all this happening right off their shores and got a little angry.
Yeah, understandably.
And this is a point in Mexico's history where they actually had a bit of political power internationally. This was the time of Porfirio Diaz, the president. This man, so Mexico has some power internationally due to Porfirio Diaz kind of Europeizing the country. And so... Europeizing. Now, Mexico sees all this going on, all this conflict, and says, why are you guys arguing? It's not yours. It's ours. And so Mexico, about a month later, sends a gunboat to the island. A gunboat called La Demócrata, so the democratic one. is the name of the ship, sends a gunboat to occupy the island and annex the island to Mexico.
Yeah.
And so, due to force, Mexican authorities arrived in the island, kicked out everyone, and established a colony on Clipperton Island. On, by the way, the famously uninhabitable island. Keep that in mind. Put a pin on that one.
France was like, the United States has conceded. We now have full ownership of this island. And Mexico's like, you have what?
Why did nobody notify me? Now, so because of this, military governors were posted on the island to take care of it.
Of course.
It was a colony. Several years later passed. Now there's a bit of a mining colony there too, because now Mexico is in cahoots with the British government to allow them to mine guano also. There's people love their poop.
Forbidden nectar of guano.
Exactly. Now, because of this, it's now early 1900s. There's a whole now operation. There's a colony there. Porfirio Diaz, the president in 1906, ordered the construction of a lighthouse on the atoll.
Nice.
So, again, this is going really well. At this point, the colony has around 100 people, like men, women, children, fully living on the island. And once again, there are no resources on this island other than a couple of coconut trees. And how do they get their resources? Well, there's a ship that comes from Acapulco all the way to the island like twice a week or like every other week. Right? So they're receiving resources from Mexico.
So we're talking no trees level. We're like that level of uninhabitable.
Literally, Kurt, from if what I've read is correct, there were 6 palm trees.
We're like pile of sand in the middle of the ocean, like spitting in God's face just
Yes.
by attempting to inhabit this place clearly not meant
Yes.
to live in by humans. Yeah,
So-
just like Phoenix.
it's crazy. Clipperton Island, Phoenix, Arizona. No difference.
Uninhabitable.
Yeah. Now, again, keep in mind, uninhabitable, it gets resupplied every couple of months. By early 1900s, mid 1900s, they're doing fine. They're getting their supplies from Acapulco. Everything's going well. Now, Kurt, do you know what happens in 1910? More specifically, 1910 Mexican history?
Boy, do I. My favorite year. However, you tell it so much better than me.
Right. Now, 1910, the Mexican Revolution
Good year.
starts. A good year, I guess.
Good year.
The
Good
Mexican
year.
Revolution starts, which is yet another Mexican Civil War that lasts for 10 years-ish. And so, because the Civil War starts out, eventually the Acapulco ship with supplies stops going to the island.
Oh no more trees.
No more trees. So they're
They took
left
away
without
trees.
supplies. They're left without supplies. And now there's 100 people stuck here. And you know what? Fine.
Right.
Sure. They can fish because there's plenty of fish. They can kill the birds and they have some coconuts, luckily. You know? So
Okay.
they do
Something at least.
there's something, right? And the inhabitants were fully left to their own devices to try to survive.
Wow.
And they mostly were able to live fine. However, when you only are eating coconuts and fish, there's this thing that tends to happen. You may or may not start developing things like scurvy.
Oops.
You know? So by 1917, so 7 years
If only we
since...
could have got some of the vitamin D out of that sweet lumber they were bringing.
Yes. By 1917, of the 100 inhabitants that were there, only around 20 people were left.
Oh no, that's so sad.
Mostly the women and children had remained alive. Like most of the children were alive and some women.
That's good.
Almost all the male inhabitants had died. The only person that was left alive was the lighthouse keeper.
So what I'm hearing is, you know what's not dead on this island? Chivalry, Luis.
Put a pin on that.
Oh,
because-
okay.
So these are the only people left alive. Like even
Right.
the military governor that was set there, his name was Ramon Arnaud.
Okay.
This man, he actually gathered a bunch of men to try to flag down a passing ship from the island to try to get them to take them out, because they have no way to communicate with the outside world. Absolutely no way to communicate. He goes out with them, dies, drowns.
Oops.
So that's how a bunch of people died
Participation medal.
too. Yeah, so that's how a bunch of people died. Now, like I said, the only people that remained here are women, children, and the lighthouse keeper, who is named Victoriano Alvarez. Okay?
So mysterious. It's an island. There's no trees on it. Only the women and children are left alive. And the lighthouse keeper.
And a sole lighthouse keeper that proclaimed himself king of the island.
Is that a bit or is that the story?
No, he proclaimed himself king. Victoriano Alvarez proclaimed himself king of the island and growing mad with power, started raping and murdering as he saw fit.
No. Okay, we are back to before when I was talking about, look, if you're starting a religion and you need a holy land, maybe don't pick the same holy land as everyone else. There's a lot of room in North and South Dakota, plenty of free real estate. Why would you declare yourself king of an island already disputed by how many? 4 nations or something?
Yeah.
Victoriano, there's a lot of room in the Dakotas. You can be king of many, many islands out there, claimed by at least less than 2 nations.
Yeah.
I just feel like I respect the hustle by him, but maybe next time we need more planning is the thing.
A little bit more. Well, he begins this campaign of rape and pillaging of... There's only 15 other people there, and it's all women and children. So you can imagine the hardship and trauma that these people felt
that's pretty
with
rough.
This man. So it's bad. Yeah. He eventually is murdered by one of the women there. Essentially, they stage a coup against this king.
Nice.
and murder this guy. Now,
take his vitamin D.
Crucial aid his body and his meat.
Get his shoes, get his vitamin D.
Exactly. Now, 1917, around July of 1917, there is a U.S. gunship that is patrolling the Pacific, doing a bit of recon, because what's going on now? World War I. It's fully going on. While all of this was happening
meanwhile, in the outside world,
World War I is going on. So this
outside of the lighthouse keeper republic, World War I.
Yes. So this gunship, this U.S. gunship, arrives in 1917. It arrives in the atoll and notices the colony of people there and stops and rescues them and rescues these people. And they find out that these women fully murdered this man. And they're like, oh, no, you were totally right doing so, dude. You're fine. You're totally okay.
As they should.
Yeah, so they were fully exonerated. They were sent back to Mexico. Whatever. They lived there. Since then, there has been no attempt to colonize this island. Clipperton Island. It was occupied briefly during World War II because every island and atoll and piece of sand in the Pacific was occupied during World War II. Mm-hmm. The only way we know about the story of this island is because the woman that killed Victoriano wrote a book about it.
Yes, get her book deal, please.
Also, the son of the captain that died trying to flag a ship also wrote a book because he was 8 years old when this was happening.
He gets a book deal too, yes. Yes, everybody needs a book deal from this island. They all deserve a book deal.
Now, to close this interesting tale of Clipperton Island, you may be wondering, who the hell owns this island now?
Right? That's true. I am pretty curious about that.
Sure. I mean, because now it belonged to Spain. Does it belong to France? Does it belong to Mexico? Does it belong to this one man who proclaimed himself king? Who knows?
We've gone through so many ownerships. I forgot Spain was in here at one point.
Very beginning.
What in the world? Bottom of the queue, Spain was in here. Check the logbook. Holy cow.
At the end of this, Mexico and France actually reached to a treaty, or a treaty ended in 1910 or like 1909. Where they now decided to say, okay, who the hell owns this island? They can put their tensions on pause. And they said, it can't be any of us. It needs to be an objective third party who needs to decide who owns this island. And so they told King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy, and they said, you solve this. And it wasn't until 20 years later in the 1930s, when Victor Emmanuel said, yeah, you know what? Clipperton Island? It's French.
It's just so funny to me that he's the king of Italy. I mean, it's because like I think the way that every country's society is that there's time periods where there's certain countries that you specifically trust or distrust.
Yeah.
And I feel like the United States just culturally has neutral feelings about Italy, but it's weird for me to think that we would put like the fate of some sort of foreign policy in the hands of Italy.
In the hands of Italy.
That's just so funny. I can't picture that happening now. People would be so upset about it, I think.
Right. I mean, it's also the hands of like a newly created country, right?
Yeah, that as well.
So Italy did not become the country we know now, like full Italy until like 1870, right? So 30 years later, they said, "Hey, Victor Emmanuel, you're new on the block. Do you want to fix this issue?"
I respect that they were like, this is an issue that cannot be decided by a congressional body or a parliament, because we know what kind of shenanigans we've been doing in here, pulling up on this island. Just pick one guy, let him decide.
Right. So until then, like the only things that have happened on the island have been just people going to do like explorations of the reefs, fishing around the area. Like some people were castaways in the island, but nothing has really happened on the island other than the boobies and the crabs.
Right.
But yeah, so now officially it belongs to the French. And fun little fact, it has a postal code, a French postal code.
Wow.
But it has no post office. So
But it's still called Clipperton Island, despite being now owned by the French?
I think officially it's Ile de Passion.
Oh, okay. That's the name you picked for our purpose, which I appreciate.
But it's known as Clipperton Island. Like
Okay.
you will find it as Clipperton Island. In Mexican records, it's known as Clipperton Island too.
Known by the locals and anyone who was here before it was international news as Clipperton Island.
Exactly.
I see. Boy, oh boy, did we really get like the real tournament here. Oh my gosh, so many world powers involved in the same little pointless island. And also the fact that, you know, this got to the point where they're like having people inhabit it and colonize it, at least to some degree, to strengthen their claim to the island, completely for no reason other than that. It's just, I mean, it's like a very classic, very familiar story, but again, on like a really large scale, where it's just the ridiculousness that it gets to is completely unbelievable.
The best part of this is that Mexico could have avoided all this tragedy, because the only tragedy that befell on any country was on Mexico. Mexico could have avoided all of this by just saying, "Nah, not my place. Go ahead." And yet,
yeah, and that's another like so disappointing that it's funny detail of the story that like Mexico didn't end up with the island.
Yeah,
it's just like that's a classic. Well, that's always going on. What are you gonna do about that one?
Classic,
you know?
Mexico move right there. So, Kurt, I think now that you've heard both stories, time to go to the most difficult part of this podcast, and that is
deliberation.
Let me remind you real quick of the two stories you just heard. The story you just heard, the Clipperton Island fiasco. Who owns it? Who knows? Guano? Coconuts? A lot of scurvy? And a failed colony with a killed king. Whole lot.
Not Mexico, that's for sure. We don't know who owns it, but it's definitely not Mexico.
Absolutely not Mexico. And the second story, Kurt, or the first story I told you, it's all about the traveling Bohemians and how the burning down of a single nightclub named the Broken Raccoon spawned such things as Pilsner beer and communism. What's not to love? So there you are, Kurt. Those are the two stories I had for you today. Stories of daring, stories of sex, love, drugs, rock and roll, and islands.
And a little accordion too, perhaps.
Little accordion just for flavor.
Okay. I've had a lot of thoughts. All right. So after the first story, I like I said before, talking about just how cultures get brought across places and how amazing it is when there's one person who doesn't really mean to bring their culture, but they end up doing it and has this giant ripple effect. That feels really real. You know, that's a story that we've all heard, but also something about the wholesomeness that it kind of works out for our boy Jan feels very real too, especially since he's not really someone who seems to be looking for the fame that he's getting. So I felt pretty good about that story. But then you're telling me this other story of this island with this convoluted history, and of course we've got a bunch of international bureaucracy wrapped up in it, and that one is at least a very true feeling story. And I know because it reminds me strongly of a past story I told you about the Sadie Convention Center in Columbus, Ohio. This is a story that, like a type of story that has come up on this podcast before, which doesn't really help me at all, because that just means that I know, you know, it's a very real sounding story, but also you could make up a story and know that it will sound very real to me. So the only two thoughts I have that were moments where I was a little bit shaky is in the first story, when the Broken Raccoon is burned down for basically insurance fraud purposes. That's not, I didn't think one way or the other about it, but it just seemed a little strange to me. I was curious if that would have been something you could actually do that far back in time, if insurance claims would work like that. And then also I had a little moment when you were talking about when the Bohemians got to France, that they opened these cabarets and bistros. Okay, I have heard this anecdote before. This could be completely untrue, and it's going to completely stab me in the back right now, maybe.
Oh, boy.
But I had heard before that the word bistro comes from German soldiers who occupied France during World War II, saying bistro because it's a French word that means like quickly, and then it became a name for these restaurants that would serve food very quickly. But that's just like a passing anecdote I've heard. So here's where I'm at right now, is that the first story I heard, I thought, this one sounds really true. I feel good about this one. The second story I heard, I thought, this one feels really true. I feel good about this one. So now I'm just really clinging to my bistro origin story like a life raft, hoping it will be my own Horton Hears a Who.
It's all depending on the bistro.
Yeah, it's all depending on the bistro. It all comes down to the bistro.
Oh, interesting.
As they say, live by the bistro, die by the bistro.
Die by the bistro.
I lock in my answer. As much as I love Yanni, I feel I cannot trust his existence at this point.
All right. So you're saying that the bistro story, the Bohemian story, is the false one.
Yes.
And the Clipperton Island story is the real one.
Yes. I must unfortunately let go of the Broken Raccoon and dreams of playing accordion all the way to France.
Well, Kurt, saddens me to inform you that you are correct.
Hey!
You did it, Kurt. It is true. The Clipperton Island, fully a very true story. It's an island that is still in dispute to this day. Kind of. No one really cares about it anymore. A lot of Mexican academia people and Mexican scientists and historians say it's a shame we ever let it go. But come on. Who cares, right? Like, no one cares about this island, and no one should care about this island. There's no strategic value to it. All you have there is crabs, poop, and boobies.
Let me tell you, guessing a story, oh my gosh, I breathed such a sigh of relief when you told me I was right, because that was so terrifying. Because I was down to just like really one detail. Both of them sounded really believable. I mean, that was because, I think if you had just asked me after the first story, like, do you think this is true or not? I would have said true. So there was nothing that you should have done differently on the story. It was super, super believable. It was just like, sometimes you remember things and you're like, I remember this for a fact. And sometimes you remember things and you're like, this seems kind of familiar. And the bistro thing to me was kind of familiar. I could be wrong about that. And maybe I just got lucky, but I was just completely relying on like, I think I remember this. And if I don't, I'm about to look like an idiot in front of whoever listens
Well,
to
Kurt,
this.
I'm about to make you look like an idiot right now.
Uh-oh.
Well, not really, because
no.
you were accidentally a successful idiot. Why? Because I have heard that
Story of my life.
I have heard that folktale of the etymology of bistro, but it's not from World War II. Rather, it's from like potential Napoleonic wars. There's also a story that in 1814 or like early 1800s, the Cossacks that arrived there, the Russian officers that arrived, did ask they want to be served quickly, and that's why it comes from there. But it doesn't come from World War II. It comes from around the time when this story that I told you was coming true, Kurt. So your failed and incorrect view of this folktale helped you. See, ignorance is not always bad. Story of my life.
Well, that's it. That settles it.
But yes, that story is entirely made up. Jan Roditz does not exist, and you very much caught my Freudian slip at the beginning when I said thank you whenever you said good name and I said thank you. That was a moment of panic. You can probably hear me scrambling to get my wording right there and try to save myself.
You know what the thing is? Like, probably someone listening to this will hear that and think like that's a moment where you slipped up. But to me, I just know your brain is going in like so many directions and also multiple languages at once that it meant nothing to me. Because you'll say things like, "Oh, the Flat Earth Society is not big on globe," or "In the '60s, the Vietnam War was happening in a big way." So to me, I was just like, that means nothing. Maybe he just said something and literally was not thinking about it.
No. That was literally a Freudian slip. I mentioned and I said, "Oh no, oh geez."
Well, there it is. I caught you.
A couple other things. I will say, Pilsner beer was made in Pilsen in Bohemia. Nothing related to gout. One happy accident is that on the way westward from Prague, you do hit Trier, which is where Karl Marx was at this time. So that was incredible.
Yeah, that was a good detail. That one really threw me because, that was like a little bit after you had said the bistro thing. So I was feeling really good, and then I was thinking of the bistro thing. And then that detail really got me because it was just, like I always say, this podcast really makes us appreciate that things can be stranger than fiction, right? That detail was just so random. I was like, that doesn't feel very made up. That one feels like it happened.
So yeah, that was fully a made-up story, Kurt. The term Bohemian is literally just... people thought that these weird people were coming from the East. Also, I think Bohemian is actually a bit of it has racial origins, as in, people in like what's now Germany or France saw Romani people that were thought to be from Bohemia arriving and bringing their customs. So they're like, oh, these Bohemians, whoop, whoop. So
it's funny you say that, but I was just thinking, like, when you told the story, because I didn't know the origin of the word, and so then you told me, I was like, I guess I still don't know the origin of the word. But the story felt very real, and like that explanation somehow feels even more real. That it's like based on not really anything except xenophobia and a little bit of racism.
I tried to paint a lighter note. I wanted to live in a happier world where racism was never an issue, but alas, it always comes back.
Yes.
Turns out it's racist all along.
You made a much more fun history. Yeah. And on this podcast, as you know, history is always multiple choice, right? But so that brings our score to 1-1.
Yes, we are tied.
Which makes me very excited because I gotta say, I'm like just completely mentally broken about trying to win this deal. I mean, don't get me wrong. I am pulling out all the stops, and I am always trying to find new ways to mess with your head, for sure. And having some success, it seems like. But at the same time, no matter what idea I've come up with, I'm like, Luis is going to figure out some way around this. He's going to whip out some Dr. Seuss book at the last second, or something that he remembers, or some weird detail, or I told him this story 8 years ago before I even met him somehow. Look, the point is, I don't know what it's going to be, but somehow every time I think like I have no chance just because you never fail to surprise me. But hey, here we are, season 2, all tied up. All even.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And with that, thank you for listening to this episode of Unbelievable. Were you able to guess the stories correctly? Were you able to be as smart a cookie as Kurt was today? Let us know. We are on social media, Instagram at UnbelievablePod. We're also on Twitter at UnbelievablePC. There's some really stupid stuff there. Please follow us. We are available on most listening platforms. If you look us up, Unbelievable, ! With Kurt and Luis, we'll be there.
Sure.
And, thanks for listening, I guess. And I guess we'll see you next time.
Don't base your foreign policy on finders keepers.
No.
You probably don't even have a foreign policy, but if you do, don't base it on finders keepers.
There we go.